Tommy Battle is running for re-election and fighting for his 4th term as mayor of Huntsville. He's having a watch party tonight at Early Works Grand Hall in Huntsville. Our Kelly Kennedy is there now. Kelly, what is it looking like?
Connor, there are just some last-minute touches being made. No guests are here yet. The crowd will actually look a lot smaller than normal. Mayor Battle only invited just a few of his supporters, family, and friends to watch these results come in tonight. The entire event actually looks a little bit different this year. Of course, people are required to wear face masks and follow social distancing guidelines. There's hand sanitizer on the tables and the chairs are spread apart. Mayor Battle usually hosts 350 people, but only 100 guests were invited this year. I spoke with his campaign manager earlier, who says the pandemic has also impacted how he had to campaign.
Usually when Mayor Battle runs for office, he likes to do about 40 neighborhood or community meetings and events. That's where we get together at someone's house with a whole bunch of voters, and he answers questions and shares what his plans are for the next 4 years. We've done that virtually this time.
Battle is up against 3 other candidates for Huntsville's mayor: Jackie Reed, Andy Wallozin, and Maurice Shingleton Jr. This party will get started at 7. More people are expected to roll in about an hour as the polls close. Putting the Valley first, live in Huntsville, Kelly Kennedy, WZDX News.